book was so terrifying in places. Of course, there's an evil, I say evil, but it's just a wicked sense of humor. Evil's not really the right word. Wicked threads through it, but it was intense. And I was so afraid of him, and then he came and he talked to this audience, and he's just full of humor and insight and quite theatrical and just an amazing, amazing writer. So when he came out with this, so we were very proud to give the book to the world and to continue to purvey it, but we just knew what we had on our hands was this insane talent. And then he produces this book of short stories. And I can say about Adam that he is not afraid of the dark side of human nature. But then on the other side, I think about Elie Wiesel, who said the most complete heart is a broken heart. And I think that there's so much about love and loss and hope in all of his stories, and the way that the political world is never, never out of the human heart either. The political is greatly influencing your living, and it's intertwined with human nature and tribal living. So you have an opportunity to hear him tonight, but the 6 stories are devastatingly good, and you are just a devastatingly good writer, and we're lucky to have you in our greater Bay Area community. So please, a warm welcome for Adam Johnson.
Thank you, Karen. That's very wonderful. Thank you, Monica, for all your help. Thanks to everyone who came out tonight who's not a Trader Joe's. We know who they are.
Or yoga.
Or yoga. How about that? That sounds natural. It's a joy to be here. I love this bookstore. It's an icon. I travel to a lot of places in America. I'm going to 51, I'm doing 51 literary events for this book. And I did about that for the last one. So I'd like to meet readers and booksellers, and but not every town has a bookstore like this. If you live around this place, I mean, what a dream it is to kind of come and coagulate with other people who are like you and to cohere. So these places help connect writers and readers, and just what makes an independent bookstore really work, I think, is just the enthusiasm of the people who work there, who come to know you, they come to know what you like, they come to know all the books, and they just put books in your hands that are the right ones over time, and you trust them. So it's great to be here. I have a collection of short stories. It's called Fortune Smiles. There are 6 stories in there. They're long. I feel like at the heart of each one of them is a novel. I could have milked them out, but I tried to coil them as tightly as I could. I'd probably read a story tonight. I do like to read stories. If you're in the mood for a story, if you're in the mood to just chat and ask me crazy questions about Dennis Rodman in North Korea, you know, I'm happy to go there too. Who wants to hear a story? Okay, unanimous. I used to wear Carhartt jeans when I worked construction, long before I went to the university. But now they hold my reading glasses. So there's no need to change. Don't ever change. I know in your yearbook they say stay the same, and you're right. Let your literary characters change. All right. This is a story called Nirvana. And Kurt Cobain is in the story. Can someone tell us who Kurt Cobain was? Lead singer of Nirvana. What happened to him? Killed himself. Okay, great. Just, you know, maybe some people are into jazz or something. So I want to make sure I got that reference. I did read this story once, and someone came up afterwards and said, you know, I love that story. Who was that guy you were talking about? So that way you won't have to be that embarrassed person. The story's a rather long one, but don't worry, I chopped it down. I took out everything but the darkness and the sex. So you've been warned. It'll take about as long as a half-hour TV show. That's your measurement of life. It is for my kids. Nirvana. It's late and I can't sleep. I raise a window for some spring Palo Alto air, but it doesn't help. In bed, eyes open, I hear whispers, which makes me think of the president because we often talk in whispers. I know the whispering sound is really just my wife Charlotte, who listens to Nirvana on her headphones all night and tends to sleep mumble the lyrics. Charlotte has her own bed, a mechanical one. My sleep problem is this: when I close my eyes, I keep visualizing my wife killing herself, or more like the way she might try to kill herself since she's paralyzed from the shoulders down. The paralysis is quite temporary, though try convincing Charlotte of that. She slept on her side today to fight the bed sores, and there was something about the way she stared at the bed's safety rail. Her bed is voice activated, so if she could somehow get her head between the bars, incline is all she'd have to say. As the bed powered up, she'd be choked in seconds. But my wife doesn't need an exotic suicide strategy, not when she's exacted a promise from me to help her do it when the time comes. I rise and I go to Charlotte. She's not listening to Nirvana yet. She saves it for when she needs it most, after midnight when her nerves really start to crackle. I thought I heard a noise, I tell her, kind of a whisper. Short, choppy hair frames her drawn face, skin faint as refrigerator light. I heard it too, she says. Next to her voice remote is a half-smoked joint. I light it and I hold it to her lips. How's the weather in there? I ask her. Windy, she says. Windy's better than hail or lightning or, God forbid, flooding, which is the sensation she felt when her lungs were just starting to work again. But there are different kinds of wind. I ask, windy like a whistle through window screens or windy like the rattle of storm shutters? A strong breeze, hissy and buffeting, she says, like a microphone in the wind. Charlotte hates being stoned, but she says it quiets the inside of her. She has Guillain-Barré syndrome, a condition in which her immune system attacks the insulation around her nerves. When the brain sends signals to the body, the impulses ground out before they can be received. 1 billion nerves inside her send signals that go everywhere and nowhere. This is the 9th month of her illness, a month at the edge of the medical literature. It's a place where the doctors no longer feel qualified to tell us whether Charlotte's nerves will begin to regenerate or whether she'll be stuck like this forever. She exhales, coughing. Her right arm twitches, which means her brain has failed at telling her arm to rise and cover the mouth. She tokes again. Through the smoke, she says, I'm worried. What about? I asked. You? You're worried about me? I want you to stop talking to the president, she says. It's time to accept reality. I try to be lighthearted. The president's the one who talks to me, I tell her. Then stop listening, she says. He's gone. When your time comes, you're supposed to fall silent. I nod, but she doesn't understand. Stuck in this bed, having sworn off television, she's probably the only person in America who didn't see the assassination. If she'd beheld the look in the president's eyes when his life was taken, she'd understand why I talked to him late at night. If she could leave this room and feel the nation trying to grieve, she'd know why I reanimated the commander-in-chief and brought him back to life. Concerning my conversations with the president, I say, I just point out that you spend half your life listening to Nirvana, whose songs are by a guy who blew his brains out. Charlotte tilts her head and looks at me like I'm a stranger. Kurt Cobain took the pain of his life and made it into something that mattered, she says. What did the president leave behind? Uncertainties, emptiness, 1,000 rocks to overturn? She talks like this when she's stoned. I tap out the joint and I lift her headphones. Are you ready for your Nirvana? I ask her. She looks at the window. That whispering sound. I hear it again, she says. At the window, I peer out into darkness. It's a normal Palo Alto night. Blue recycling bins, a raccoon digging in the community garden. And then I notice it. Right before my eyes, a small black drone is hovering. Its tiny servos swivel to regard me. Real quick, I snatch the drone out of the air and I pull it inside. I close the window and the curtains and I study the thing. Its shell is made of black foil, stretched over tiny struts like the bones of a bat's wing. Behind a propeller of clear cellophane, a tiny infrared engine throbs with warmth. Now will you listen to me, Charlotte asks. Now will you stop it with this president business? It's too late for that, I tell her, and I release the drone. As if blind, it bumbles around the room. Is it autonomous? Has someone been operating it? Someone watching our house? Play music, Charlotte tells her voice remote. Closing her eyes, she waits for me to place the headphones on her ears, where she will hear Kurt Cobain come to life once more. I wake later in the night. The drone has somehow turned itself on and is hovering above me, mapping my body with a beam of red light. And then a green laser strikes my forehead, and I know the drone is attempting to determine my emotions. I toss a pillow over the thing, dropping it to the floor. After making sure that Charlotte's asleep, I pull out my eye projector, turn it on, and the president appears in 3 dimensions, his torso life-size in an amber glow. He greets me with a smile. "It's good to be back in Palo Alto," the president says. My algorithm has accessed the eye projector's GPS chip and searched the president's database for location references. This one came from a commencement address he gave at Stanford back when he was a senator. "Mr. President," I say, "I'm sorry to bother you again, but I have more questions." He looks into the distance, contemplative. "Shoot," he says. I move into his line of sight, but I can't quite get him to look me in the eye. It's one of the design problems I ran across. "Did I make a mistake in creating you?" I ask him. "In releasing you to the world? My wife says that you're keeping people from mourning, that this you keeps us from accepting the fact that the real you is gone." The president rubs the stubble on his chin. "You can't put the genie back in the bottle," he says, which is eerie, because that's a line he had spoken on 60 Minutes, a moment when he expressed regret for legalizing drones for civilian use. "Do you know that I'm the one who made you?" I ask him. "We're all born free," the president says, "and no person may traffic in another." "But you weren't born," I tell him. "I wrote an algorithm based on a Linux operating kernel. You're an open source search engine married to a dialogue bot and a video compiler. My program scrubs the web and archives a person's images and video and data. Everything you say, you've said before." For the first time, the president falls silent. I ask, "Do you know that you're gone, that you've died?" The president doesn't hesitate. "The end of life is another kind of freedom," he says, and the assassination flashes in my eyes. I've seen the video so many times. The motorcade slowly crawls along while the president, on foot, parades past the barricaded crowds. Someone in the throng catches the president's eye. The president turns, lifts a hand in greeting, then a bullet strikes him in the abdomen. The impact bends him forward. His eyes lift to confront the shooter. A look of recognition settles into the president's gaze, of a person, of a truth, of something he's foreseen. He takes the second shot in the face. You can see the switch go off. His limbs give and he is down. They put him on a machine for a few days, but the end had already come. I glance over at Charlotte, asleep. "Mr. President," I say, "did you and the First Lady ever talk about the worst case scenario? I wonder if the First Lady was the one to turn off his machine." The president smiles. "Well, the First Lady and I have a wonderful relationship. We share everything," he says. "But were there promises?" I say. "Did you make a promise?" His voice lowers, becomes sonorous. "Are you asking about the bonds of matrimony?" "I suppose so," I say. "In this regard," he says, "our only duty is to be of service in any way we can." And my mind ponders the ways in which I might have to be of service to Charlotte. Then the president looks into the distance like there's a flag over there. "I'm the president of the United States," he says, "and I approved this message." That's when I know our conversation's over. But when I reach to turn off the eye projector, the president looks me squarely in the eye. My finger hesitates. "Seek your inner resolve," he tells me. Can you tell a story that doesn't begin? It's just suddenly happening? The woman you love gets the flu. Her fingers tingle, her legs go rubbery. Soon she can't grip a coffee cup. What finally gets her to the hospital is the need to pee. She is dying to pee, but the paralysis has begun. The bladder can no longer hear the brain. After an ER doc inserts a Foley catheter, you learn new words. Axon, areflexia, ascending peripheral polyneuropathy. Charlotte says she's filled with noise, that inside her is a storm. The doctor gets a big needle. He tells Charlotte to climb on the gurney. Charlotte's scared to get on the gurney. She's scared she won't ever get up again. Please, honey, you say, get on the gurney. And soon you behold the glistering glow of your wife's spinal fluid. And she is right. She doesn't get up again. Next comes plasmapheresis, then high-dose immunoglobulin therapy. The doctors mention casually the word ventilator. Charlotte's mother arrives. She brings her cello. She's an expert on the siege of Leningrad. She's written a book on the topic. When Charlotte's coma is induced, her mother fills the neuro ward with the saddest sounds ever conceived. 2 months of physical therapy in Santa Clara. Here are dunk tanks, sonar stimulators, exoskeletal treadmills. Charlotte doesn't make progress. The doctors don't call her a soldier or a champ or a trooper. She soon convinces herself that I will leave her for one of the nurses in the rehab ward. She screams at me to get a vasectomy, so this nurse and I will suffer a barren future. To soothe her, I read aloud Joseph Heller's memoir about contracting Guillain-Barré syndrome. The book was supposed to make us feel better. Instead, it chronicles how great Heller's friends are, how high Heller's spirits are, how Heller leaves his wife to marry the beautiful nurse who tends to him. And for Charlotte, the book's ending is particularly painful. Joseph Heller gets better. Finally, his discharge, yet home is unexpectedly surreal. Amid familiar surroundings, the impossibility of normal life is amplified, but the cat is happy, so happy to have Charlotte home that it spends an entire night curled on her tracheal incision. Goodbye, cat. Still to be described are tests, tantrums, treatments, to come with the discoveries of marijuana and Kurt Cobain. Of these times, there's only one moment that I must relate. It was a normal night. I was beside Charlotte in the mechanical bed, holding up her People magazine. She said, "You don't know how bad I want to get out of this bed." Her voice was quiet, uninflected. She'd said similar things 1,000 times. "I'd do anything to escape," she said. I flipped the page and laughed at a picture whose caption read, "Stars are just like us." "But I could never do that to you," "I could never do that to you," she said. "Well, do what?" I asked. "Nothing." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "What's going through your head?" I turned to look at her. She was this close. "Except for how it would hurt you," she said, "I would get away." "Would get away where?" "From here." Neither of us had spoken of the promise since the night it was exacted. I tried to pretend the promise didn't exist, but it existed. "Face it, you're stuck with me," I said, forcing a smile. "We're fated to be together, and soon you'll be better, and things will be normal again." "My entire life is this pillow," she said. "Well, that's not true. You've got your friends and family, you've got technology. The whole world's at your fingertips," I told her. By friends, I met her nurses and physical therapists. By family, I met her distant and brooding mother. It didn't matter. Charlotte was too disengaged to even point out her non-functional fingers and their non-feeling tips. She rolled her head and stared at the safety rail. "It's okay," she said. "I'd never do that to you." In the morning, I massage Charlotte's legs and feet. It's our daily routine. "Let's wake up," I tell her toes. "It's time to start dancing." "Look who's Mr. Brightside," she says. "You must have been talking to the president. Isn't that why you talk to him, to get all inspired?" I rub her Achilles tendon. Last week, Charlotte failed a big test, the DTRE, which measures deep tendon response and signals the beginning of recovery. "Don't worry," the doctor told us. "I know of another patient who also took 9 months to respond, and he managed a full recovery." I asked the doctor if we could contact this patient to know what he went through, to help us see what's ahead. The doctor informed us that this patient was attended to in France in the year 1918. After the doctor left, I went into the garage and started making the president. A psychologist would probably say the reason I created him had to do with the promise I made Charlotte and the fact that the president also had a relationship with the person who took his life. But it's simpler than that. I just needed to save somebody. And with the president, it didn't matter that I was too late. I tapped Charlotte's patella. There's no response. Any pain, I ask? So what did the president say, she asks. I articulate the plantar fascia. How about this? I saw the eye projector, she says. I know you talked to him. It's going to be one of her bad days. Let me guess, Charlotte says. The president told you to move to the South Pacific to take up painting. That's inspiring, isn't it? I don't say anything. Well, you'd take me with, right? Charlotte asks. I could be your assistant. I could hold your color palette in my teeth. If you need a model, I specialize in reclining nudes. If you must know, I tell her, the president told me to locate my inner resolve. Inner resolve, she says. I could use some help tracking down mine. You have more resolve than anyone I know, I tell her. Jesus, you're sunny. Don't you know what's going on, she asks. Don't you see that I'm about to spend the rest of my life like this? Pace yourself, darling, I say. This day is only a couple minutes old. I know, she says. I'm supposed to have reached the stage of enlightened acceptance or something. You think I like it that the only person I have to get mad at is you? I know it's not right. You're the one thing I love in this world. You love Kurt Cobain. He's dead, she says. Promise me something. No, I tell her. Come on, if you do, I'll release you from that other promise. I shake my head. She doesn't mean it. She'll never release me. She says, just agree to talk straight with me. You don't have to be fake and optimistic. It doesn't help. But I am optimistic. Well, you shouldn't be, she says. Pretending, that's what killed Kurt Cobain. I think it was the shotgun he pointed at his head, but I don't say that. I only know one line from a Nirvana song. I karaoke it to Charlotte. With the lights on, I sing, she's less dangerous. She rolls her eyes. You got it wrong, she says, but she smiles. I try to encourage this. What, I don't get points for trying? You don't hear that? Charlotte asks. Hear what? That's the sound of me clapping, Charlotte says. I give up, I tell her. Bed, incline, Charlotte says, and she starts her day. In the garage, I decide to get to the bottom of this drone business. I dock the drone to a bank of servers and use some slave code to parse its drive. I burn through its firewall and then reinitialize. It turns out the little guy speaks Google. So I sync it to a pair of Android glasses. I install a new OS, reboot, and like that, the drone is mine. Wearing the glasses, I roll my eyes, and the drone, lithe and liquid, does a backflip. Inside the house, I find Charlotte suspended in a sling from the Hoyer lift, which has been rolled to the window so she can see outside. I go to her, and I open the window. You read my mind, she says, and she breathes the fresh air. I put the Android glasses on her, and it takes her eyes a minute of flashing around before the drone lifts from my hands. A grand smile crosses her face as she puts it through its paces, hovering, rotating, swiveling the camera's servos, and then the drone is off. She sends it across the lawn, veering around the compost piles, heading for the community garden. When she makes it to her plot, she gasps. My roses, she says, they're still there. Someone's been taking care of them. I wouldn't let your roses die, I tell her. She has the drone inspect every bloom. Carefully, she maneuvers it through the bright petals, brushing against the blossoms, and then she shuttles it home again. Suddenly, it's hovering before us. She sniffs the drone. I never thought I'd smell my roses again, she says, her face flushed with hope and amazement, and the tears begin streaming. I remove her glasses, and we leave the drone hovering there. She regards me. I want to have a baby, she says. A baby? It's been 9 months. I could have had one already. I could have been doing something useful this whole time. But your illness, I say, we don't know what's ahead. She closes her eyes like she's hugging something, like she's holding some dear truth. With a baby, I'd have something to show for all this. I'd have a reason. At the least, I'd have something to leave behind. You can't talk like that, I tell her. We have talked about you not talking like this, but she won't listen to me. She won't open her eyes. All she says is, and I want to start tonight. Later, I carry the eye projector out back to the gardening shed. Here in the gold of afternoon light, the president rises and comes to life. Mr. President, I say, I'm sorry to bother you again. Nonsense, he tells me. I serve at the pleasure of the people. Do you remember me, I ask him? Do you remember the problems I've been talking to you about? Well, perennial is the nature of the problems that plague man. Particular is the voice with which they call to each of us. My problem today is of a personal nature, I say. Well, then I place this conversation under the seal. I haven't made love to my wife in a long time. He holds up a hand to hold me. He smiles in a knowing, fatherly way. Times of doubt, he tells me, are inherent in the compact of civil union. My question, Mr. President, is about children. Would you have still brought yours into the world, knowing that only one of you might be around to raise them? Well, single parenting places too much strain on today's families, he says. That's why I'm introducing legislation that will reduce the burden on our hardworking parents. What about your children? Do you miss them? Well, my mind goes to them constantly. Being away is the great sacrifice of the office. In the shed, suspended dust makes his specter glitter and swirl. I feel some urgency. When it's all finally over, I ask, where is it that we go? Well, I'm no preacher, the president says, but I believe we go where we are called. But where were you called to? Where is it that you are? Don't we all try to locate ourselves among the pillars of uncommon knowledge? You don't know where you are, do you? I asked the president. I'm sure my opponent would like you to believe that. It's okay, I say, more to myself. I didn't expect you to know. Well, I know exactly where I am, the president says. And then, in a voice that sounds pieced from many scraps, he adds, I'm currently positioned at 37.44 north by 122.14 west. I think he's done. I wait for him to say goodnight and God bless America. Instead, he reaches out to touch my chest. I have heard that you have made much personal sacrifice, he says, and I'm told that your sense of duty is strong. I don't think I agree, but I say, yes, sir. His glowing hand then clasps my shoulder, and it doesn't matter that I can't feel it. That this medal that I have fixed to your uniform is much more than a piece of silver. It is a symbol of how much you've given, not just in armed struggle, and not just in service to your nation. It marks you forever as one who can be counted upon, as one who in times of need will lift up and carry those who have fallen. Proudly, he stares into the empty space above my shoulder. He says, now return home to your wife, soldier, and start a new chapter in life. When darkness falls, I go to Charlotte. The night nurse has placed her in a negligee. She lowers the bed as I approach. The electric motor is the only sound in the room. I'm ovulating, she announces. I can feel it. You can feel it? I don't need to feel it, she says. I know. She's strangely calm. Are you ready? She says. Sure. I steady myself on the safety rail that separates us. She asks, do you want some oral sex first? I shake my head. Come join me then, she says. I start to climb on the bed, but she stops me. Hey, sunshine, she says. Take off your clothes. I can't remember the last time she called me that. Oh, yeah, I say, and I unbutton my shirt and unzip my jeans. When I drop my underwear, I feel weirdly naked. I swing a leg up, and then I kind of lie on her. A look of contentment crosses her face. This is how it's supposed to be, she says. It's been so long since I could look into your eyes. Her body is narrow, but warm, and I don't know where to put my hands. Do you want to pull down my panties? I sit up, and I begin to work them off. I see the scar from the femoral stent. When I hacked her legs, they're the bed sores we've been fighting. Remember our trip to Mexico, she asked, where we made love on the top of that pyramid? It was like we were in the past and the future at the same time. I kind of feel that now. You're not stoned, are you? I ask her. What? Like I have to be high to recall the first time we talked about having a baby? When I have her panties off and her legs hooked, I pause. It takes all of my focus to get an erection, and then I can't believe that I have one. Here is my wife, paralyzed, invalid, insensate, and though everything's the opposite of erotic, I'm poised above her, completely hard. I'm wet, aren't I? Charlotte asks. I have been thinking about this all day. I do remember that pyramid. The stone was cold, the staircase steep. The past to me was a week of Charlotte in Mayan dresses, cooing at every baby she ran across. Having sex under jungle stars, I tried to imagine our future, a faceless someone conceived on a sacrificial altar. I finished early, and I tried to shake the whole thing off. I focused only on those steps we had to make it down in the dark. I think I feel something, she says. You're inside me, right? Because I'm pretty sure I can feel it. Here I enter my wife and begin our lovemaking. I try to focus on the notion that if this works, Charlotte will be safe, that for 9 months she'd let no harm come to her, and maybe she's right. Maybe the baby will stimulate something and recovery will begin. She smiles. It's brittle, but it's a smile. How's this for finding the silver lining, she says. I won't have to feel the pain of childbirth. This makes me wonder if a paralyzed woman can push out a baby, or does she get the scalpel? And if so, is there anesthesia? And suddenly my body is at the edge of not cooperating. Hey, are you here, she asks. I'm trying to get you to smile. I just need to focus, I tell her. I can tell you're not really into this, she says. I can tell you're still hung up on the idea that I'm going to do something drastic to myself. Just because I talk about crazy stuff, it doesn't mean I'm going to do anything. I say, why would you make me promise to help you do it? The promise came early, in the beginning, just before the ventilator. She had a vomiting reflex that lasted for hours. Imagine endless dry heaves while you're paralyzed. The doctors finally gave her narcotics. Drugged, dead-limbed, and vomiting. That's when it hit her that her body was no longer hers. I was holding her hair, keeping it out of the basement. She was panting between heaves. She said, promise me that when I tell you to make it stop, you'll make it stop. Make what stop? I asked. She retched, long and cord rattling. I knew what she meant. It won't come to that, I said. She tried to say something, but retched again. I promise, I said. Now, in her mechanical bed, her negligee straps slipping off her shoulders, Charlotte says, it's hard for you to understand. I know, but the idea that there's a way out, it's what allows me to keep going. I'd never take it. You believe me, don't you? I hate that promise, I tell her. I hate that you made me make it. I'd never do it. I'd never make you help. Then release me, I tell her. I'm sorry, she says. I can't. I decide to just shut it all out and keep going. I'm losing my erection, and my mind wonders what will happen if I go soft. Do I have it in me to fake it? But I shut it out, and I keep going and going, pounding on Charlotte until I can barely feel anything. Her breasts loll alone below me, and from the bedside table, the drone turns itself on and rises, hovering. It flashes my forehead with its green laser, as if what I'm feeling is that easy to determine, as if my emotion has a name. Is the drone spying on me, feeling sympathy, executing old code? I wonder if the drone's OS reverted to a previous version, or if Google reacquired it, or if it's in some kind of autonomous mode. Or it could be that somebody hacked the Android glasses. Or maybe, that's when I look down and I see that Charlotte's crying. I stop. No, don't, she says. Keep going. She's not crying hard, but they are fat, lamenting tears. We can try again tomorrow, I tell her. No, I'm okay, she says. Just keep going and do something for me, would you? All right, I say. Put the headphones on me. You mean while we're doing it? Music on, she says. From the headphones on her bedside table, Nirvana starts to hum. I know I'm doing it all wrong, I say. It's been a long time, and it's not you, she says. I just need my music. Put them on me. Why do you need Nirvana? What is it to you, I ask her. She closes her eyes and shakes her head. What is it with this Kurt Cobain, I say? What's your deal with him? I grab her wrists, but she can't feel it.
Why do you have to have this music? What is wrong with you, I demand? Just tell me what it is that's wrong with you. The drone follows me into the garage, where it wanders the walls looking for a way out. I turn on a computer and I download one of these Nirvana albums. I play the whole thing, just sitting there in the dark. This guy, this Kurt Cobain, sings about being stupid and dumb and unwanted. In one song, he says Jesus doesn't whine for a sunbeam. Another's called All Apologies, but he never actually apologizes. He doesn't even say what he did wrong. The drone, having found no escape, comes to me and hovers. I lift the remote for the garage door opener. Is this what you want, I ask it? Freedom? The drone silently hums, impassive atop its column of warm air. I press the button. The drone waits until the garage door is all the way up, and then it snaps a photograph of me and zooms off into the Palo Alto night. I stand and I breathe the air, which is cool and flowered. Moonlight casts leaf patterns on the driveway. Down the street, I spot the glowing eyes of our cat. I call its name, but he doesn't come. I gave him to a friend a couple blocks away, and for a few weeks the cat returned at night to visit me. Not anymore. This feeling of being in proximity to something that's lost to you, it seems like my whole life right now. It's a feeling Charlotte would understand if she would just talk to the president. But he's not the one she needs to speak to. I suddenly understand that. I return to my computer bench and I fire up a bank of screens. I stare into their blue glow and get to work. It takes me hours, most of the night before I'm done. It's almost dawn when I go to Charlotte. The room is dark and I can only see her outline. Bed, incline, I say, and she starts to rise. She wakes and stares at me but says nothing. I set the eye projector in her lap. She hates the thing, but she doesn't say anything. She only tilts her head a little like she's sad for me, and then I turn it on. Kurt Cobain appears before her, clad in a bathrobe and composed of soft blue light. Charlotte inhales. Oh my God, she murmurs. She looks at me. Is it him? I nod. She marvels at him. What do I say, she asks. Can he talk? I don't answer. Kurt Cobain's hair is in his face. Shifting her gaze a little, Charlotte tries to look into his eyes. While the president couldn't quite find your eyes, Kurt is purposely avoiding them. I can't believe how young you are, Charlotte tells him. You're just a boy. Kurt mumbles, I'm old. Are you really here, she asks. Here we are now, he sings. Entertain us. His voice is rough and hard-lived. It's some kind of proof of life to Charlotte. She looks at me, filled with wonder. I thought he was gone, she says. I can't believe he's really here. Kurt shrugs. I only appreciate things when they're gone, he says. And Charlotte looks stricken. I recognize that line, she says. That's a line from his suicide note. How does he know that? Has he already written it? Does he know what he's going to do? I don't know, I tell her. This isn't my conversation to have. I back away toward the door, and just as I'm leaving, I hear her start talking to him. Don't do what you're thinking about doing, she pleads with him. You don't know how special you are. You don't know how much you matter to me, she says carefully, like she's talking to a child. Please don't take yourself from me. You can't do that to me, she says to him, and she leans barely toward Kurt Cobain, like she wants to throw her arms around him and hold him, like she's forgotten that her arms don't work. And there is no him to embrace. I had to cut 2 sex scenes, but you know, you got the feeling. At the end of a reading, traditionally the highest compliment is this kind of involuntary thrum that kind of goes. It happens most at poetry readings, like when Kay Ryan reads a poem at the end, you go. You can't help it, right? And when it happens in a whole room, like Billy Collins does it, there's this collective, like a purring satisfaction. That doesn't happen in any of my stories. Often there's like this weird silence, and that's the sound that I like. That resonant thrum, to me, is a sign that someone's written a really organic story that's working on multiple levels, and everything is grooming you toward one final feeling, a harmonic sense at the end. And I love those stories. I read them and I teach them, but they don't feel like life to me. Life to me feels like juxtaposing feelings, and there's often conflict about what's going on inside the psychology of a character. And at the end, I try to put in, like, you know, hope and desperation and all of these conflicting feelings, and I put them into you. And then when the story stops, when the emotional cargo has been transferred to you, it's a mixed load, and it's unbalanced. And I leave you going, My favorite feeling when I'm reading is when people like lean a little forward and cock their heads. They're like into this. They want to know what happens next. Like, what the F is this? And those stories just feel more true to me. And it's those stories and poems that I feel like I think about for a few days afterwards. That my mind has to chew on and process and not digested by an artist for a total effect for me. I have to kind of like ponder, what did the end of that story mean? What's going to happen next? So, thank you for letting me put you in that state. I'd be happy to field thoughts or questions. Talk about. Someone asked me the other night if it was true that Kim Jong-il really liked to get naked after dinner and go nude with his chef, Kenji Fujimoto, into the sauna where the two of them naked would exchange 100 kisses. But I'm sure you'll have other questions. Yes, sir.
What's the kernel of that story? What's the inception? Where does the little pearl come from?
Right. Yeah. Where do stories come from? Well, usually there's something gnawing at me, and then it like, I hopefully like all of you, because that would mean we're all normal. I get obsessed about things, and I'll find some weird thing, and I'll go on eBay and buy 20 of them, different varieties, or I'll, just get obsessed with things. And I've learned to like really trust those obsessions. Like that is something in me fixating, coming out in the right way. If I put those obsessions into the story, then my heart will go into it somehow. So, what about 3 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she went through her surgery and chemo. You all have friends or loved ones, you know how it goes. And so we have kids, and so there was lots of reverberations around. And but at the same time, an old friend from college took his life, and we've been roommates for like 4 years. And he was on a kind of a more troubled path, and I knew it, and I'd reached out a couple times, not enough over the years, and so, but like all the old buddies went back, and I think spilled some beers in his honor and did all that stuff that is part of grieving and sharing, and I didn't do it. I was like, our house was like very delicately balanced or out of balance, and I was like, I'm gonna have to deal with that later. But here's the obsession that came. When we were roommates all those years ago, my roommate Eric would only listen to Nirvana, which meant I only listened to Nirvana for 4 years. And Nirvana's cool, but after that I was like, I don't really want to do any more Nirvana. And but I started listening to Nirvana, and I didn't even like consciously think, oh, I want to connect to him. I was like, I want to listen to Nirvana. I started listening to it, and my kids would hear it, and they were like, what are these songs? And we like parsed the lyrics together, and they kind of got into Nirvana. And I remember I teach a fiction class at Stanford for the Stegnerfellows, and I walked in like one day humming, here we are now. And one of the Stegnerfellows said, you walked into class singing those lyrics last week. Someone else said, and the week before. And I was like, that was the soundtrack to my life. Like, my brain was trying to find what in Kurt Cobain spoke to my friend. Like, what was it? And so I decided to just like put that into a story. And you know, I don't know, we're here in the center of technology, and like things like an eye projector seem natural. Like, you can bring someone back to life that way. And it's just kind of like, you know, if you Google this, Nirvana and Popular Mechanics wrote an article on this story in which they talked to some artificial intelligence professors and said, could you make an eye projector that did this? And they all said, yeah, if someone wanted to do it now. It's just Wikipedia and Google and, you know, all these things put together, YouTube. And so I just put the president, I thought the president would have the most video footage and speeches of anyone out there. And then it just kind of turned into this thing. That was a good question. Yeah.
What was the connection to Guillain-Barré?
Oh, the GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome. That's a good one. You know, I just didn't want to write about cancer. It's such a loaded word. It would allow the reader to bring her experiences to the page, rather than for me to implant, you know, with a clean slate, a sense of how this illness worked. Unfortunately, I think cancer is used, is over sentimentalized. It's treated in a maudlin way, often in the visual formats. It's like a plot thing. Oh, the wife got cancer, and the dad has to find a new wife. Like, people are just like, it's a disposable thing that happens, instead of being like a very real serious thing. And so, and plus, I got to research. I get stimulated by researching. So that was kind of, well, I was in hospitals a lot, and so I would be like, I would go to the nurse and I'd be like, hey, do you have a Hoyer lift? And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, can we play with it? I'm a writer. You know, and I remember asking one, my wife was like asleep in a bed, and our kids were in those like horrible reclining hospital chairs that are like gray vinyl, all conked out. It was like 2 in the morning, but that's my writing time, so my mind was firing. And the nurse came in, and I was like, have you ever treated someone with GBS? She's like, oh yeah, but Susan down the hall was the expert. So we ran off to the nurse's station. Susan regaled me with all these stories, and so well, while my mind was filled with, I thought the word cancer, my mind was filled. When I thought Guillain-Barré, it was empty. I got to make it. So it's a real illness. It afflicts 1 in 100,000 people. It's rare enough that, you know, you could probably go through life without knowing about it. But it's real and serious. Yes, sir. Kevin.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about Orphan Masters.
Sure.
You were talking about character psychology, and you know, this story you read was kind of a first-person perspective, so we got a little more peek into the character's head.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Orphan Master's Son, the main character, it's so difficult to understand what's happening in his head for most of it. I feel like you really don't reveal much about it. What was that process like, or was that kind of difficult to write?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that probably, you know, like 10 different ways. You can see my teaching style. I think that character, Jun-do, the book has like 3 threads. One is like an average North Korean guy, kind of at the bottom of society, and we kind of follow him in the third person as he goes through adventures in North Korea and moves to the top of society. There's another thread in which, after that first story is totally over, he's been caught and is being interrogated. And there's a first-person character who tries to get to the story out of Jun-do, this first character. And then there's a first-person plural voice, which is the propaganda voice of the loudspeakers, who take the story that the interrogator got and twist it around to glorify the nation. And so I had three versions of the same story. I got to end the novel 3 times, which was fun. 3 different times. But I'll say this, in researching North Korea, I realized that the narrative of what it means to be a North Korean, their national narrative, was completely the opposite of ours, which fascinated me because my whole life's about stories and teaching stories and reading stories. And our narrative is a simple one. You already know it, and you've absorbed it totally if you haven't thought about it. But it's based on a couple thoughts. One, every human being is worthy and unique. Don't we all believe that? That we're all different and we're all worth being alive. Right? And that if we got to know any one of us, like Studs Terkel interviewing us, we'd find something of value there. Number two, I think we're all encouraged to be the most important persons in our lives, which I think some people in the world think that's weird. But Americans believe each one of us is most important. Sure, you love your wife or your mom or whoever, but it's about you, right? Isn't it true? Sometimes we value stories of great sacrifice, but really, come on, it's about us. And our job in being the central character in our own lives is to do this, to look inside our own selves, to plumb our hearts for our desires, aspirations, and ambitions, then to imagine a future best possible self that fulfills these goals. Whether you have to go to law school, right, or go on a trek through the Himalayas, or whatever you have to do, you then go on a journey to become that you. And our kids are taught in school to imagine this person and what you want to dream yourself into being. Then there's all these possible paths. You're the one who decides which path to go down. You encounter obstacles and conflict, and you have to overcome them and seek help from others. And you climb this mountain where the best you is at the top. And along the way, you grow and you change and you discover and you become a wiser person. You start in one place and you're transformed. That is the shape of all of our novels and all of our movies, and it's the shape of our lives. But in North Korea, it's just the opposite. It's really fascinating. In North Korea, there's one character. What's his name? Kim Jong-un. And there's 23 million secondary characters. And what they want doesn't matter. Their job is to say, "Great idea, Kim! You've done it again, Kim! I'm going to work twice as hard to double my work quotas for the betterment of it all so we can fulfill your grand vision for us." But this is more than just a notion. The defectors talk about when they're young, authorities coming from the provincial capitals or even from Pyongyang into their schools to test them all, to ascertain their aptitudes. And they say, "You're going to be a fisherman, a ballerina, and you're going to be a piano teacher." And that's that. What you want doesn't matter. In fact, it's a hindrance toward your successful survival in that society. And people learn to disconnect from their identity formation based on desires. And they're taught not to imagine futures. That doesn't help anyone meet their work quotas. And they have to choose, as everyone does in North Korea, between living, as we would define it, a meaningful life and surviving. In North Korea, you can only do one of those things. So the answer is this, Kevin, I know you forgot. When there's a long-winded answer, it sucks, because when you've asked the question, then you have to act interested in a long-winded answer. For like 10 minutes, but here it is. In the book, I had a character, and he is an ideal citizen. He does what he's told, when he's told, no matter how unsavory those things might be. But as he moves through the book, he becomes exposed to Western narratives. He meets people from the West. He hears radio broadcasts. He hears stories in which people are at the center of their own lives. And people have other desires, I interviewed a defector not long ago, and he defected because he stole a book from a secret library of 100 books that were transferred into Korean. And he had risen enough in the ranks in Pyongyang in the propaganda department that he had access to this library, and no one was supposed to take them out. And he wrote poems that glorified the regime. Kim Jong-il was who he glorified. And when he finally got into this library, he opened a book of poems by, you want to take a guess? Wordsworth.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine North Koreans reading Wordsworth? But he said it blew his mind because the poems were about trees and rivers and the sky. In North Korea, the only official poetry is about the leaders. And when I went to the National Museum in Pyongyang, they had 400 paintings on display of what? Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un wasn't there yet, but that's all there was. It was Kim Jong-il on horseback, Kim Il-sung hugging children, Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung standing in grain, looking at the horizon. There's nothing else, right? And so he couldn't believe those poems, and he snuck the book out, and he left it on the subway.
Oh.
And he said he knew it was only a day or two before they figured out it was him, and he had to run for his life. And his name is Jang Jin-sung. He has an interesting memoir called Dear Leader, and his brother and uncle were killed to pay for his defection. So, you know, that's how it works there. But what I wanted to do was start with a character that might seem foreign to you and strange to you, but over the course of the book, he becomes more like what we would think of. And in the end, he decides to make what he wants most of all is this connection to this woman and the world she represents. And all he has to do is give his life for it, which is really pretty simple, you know, in his estimation. And so, you know what, when I wrote about North Korea, I had two choices. I could explain everything or explain nothing. And I decided to have no exposition. So I don't tell you why there's loudspeakers or what these trucks are or why doves circle to give shade on Kim Jong-il. Those are just facts. And so you're defamiliarized into that society. And my hope was that by the end of the book, North Korea seemed normal, like you'd spend enough hours there. And then you'd look up and our world would seem weird. And my test was about 100 pages in, it's no spoiler, the characters go to Texas for a weird reason. And you go, well, Texas is a very strange alien place, but you go see it from North Korean eyes, and the place is as foreign and alien and bizarre as you could ever imagine. And like when I wrote those scenes, I was like, this book may work. I maybe have it, that my own world looks alien. So, yes.
How different was it to write short stories versus just a long, you know, just one book? Because I've heard that's a really different dynamic.
That's a great question. You know, I had written 2 novels back to back, and they took me like 10 years, and I just love stories.
Yeah.
Novels just like a big political act. Like the characters want one thing, the plot wants another thing, the arc wants a certain amount of time, but condensation is necessary to get this feeling. But you've got to get them back, so you like have to balance all of these things. But in a story, you can be a dictator. You can fasten every single aspect to achieve an emotionality. I think of a story as like a battery, like a Duracell, and it stores emotion, and it does nothing else. And I can fill it up, and it just holds it as long as I want. And then when you read it, it releases. Now, a novel has all these complications. I had to end one 3 times once because the plot arc here is here, but the fulfillment of this character's here, but that character, you know. But in a story, the second that emotional energy moves from the story to the reader, it's over. Do no more. Stop it immediately. And at the end of a story feels like a car that slams on its brakes, and the energy's transferred into you, and you're left kind of like that. And I had missed stories, and I wrote 6 of them just like that. They just came firing out. And I was lucky enough to get a grant from the Guggenheim Foundation to get me a year off, so I could go just be with my family and write, which was very affirmational. And then now I'm into another novel, and that has its own joys. You'd had your hand up before.
Yeah, I have to ask about Dark Meadow because it's such an incredible story,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of its power comes from very specific details. Were you ever worried about doing the research for that story and being damaged by it?
Right. There's a story in the collection. There's 6 stories. The title story is about 2 North Korean defectors in South Korea. I just read one of them, Nirvana. There's a story in there called Dark Meadow, and you know, gird yourself. You know, call a friend before you begin it. Get a safe word. Because it's, you know, it's a rare and powerful story. It was very difficult to write. And it's about a man in Los Angeles, and he has sexual urges toward children. He is the victim of abuse, and he has a compulsion toward children. And he's never fulfilled that. That is his grand struggle in life, is to have that never happen, despite the fact that his mind goes there. And you know, that story came from several places. You know, one is interesting. Every Thanksgiving, and that's about to happen again, like my family in Arizona gets together with another family in Arizona. And there's someone in that other family I only see one day a year. And when I go to the Thanksgiving dinner, I walk right past the turkey and the bourbon and everything. And there's my buddy Josh, and he is a counselor employed by the Arizona prison system. And he runs group therapy with sex offenders in Florence prison, and so, among other places. And so he's always has these amazing stories about his patients, and he also follows them on their parole and helps them readjust to society. And when we talk every Thanksgiving Day, he always talks about the humanity of these people. He's reminding me, like, year after year after year. And here's this liberal test, right? We live in California, and we do believe, most of us, that humans shouldn't be put to death, right? That humans should be treated with a certain level of dignity. And here are people that have tested that. They're as far out in the test of our reserves of humanity as could be there. These are people who've raped other people, who've molested stepdaughters and things like that. And, but he always talks about how humans can go astray, how humans can be desensitized, how humans can be hurt and rewired. And these are men who are humans and who are struggling constantly with what they've done and what they're capable of and how to redeem themselves. And, it took kind of years of hearing that before I guess as a parent, I was like, oh no, these guys are the worst. It's easy to dehumanize them from a distance. And my wife goes on, Megan's Law. Wants to look up all the creeps in our neighborhood. It's easy to have that to put your irrational fear on that possible cause, though statistically it has not, it's the worst place you could put your attention probably. But so I wondered, do you believe all humans are worthy? Do you cede your humanity when you've done something unforgivable, or can it be forgiven, these things? And I just wondered, could I find the humanity of someone? The story's difficult, I believe, because your sympathy for this person is high. It's a first-person story, and he comes out and he takes you through everything, all of his thoughts, and the measures he's taken to never hurt anyone. And he's controlled every aspect of his life and compartmentalized it so that nothing cascades. Narratively, it always comes back to being a writer. Narratively, it was very interesting. I asked my friend Josh, I said, I'm curious about this. Is there a book I can read that's a memoir of someone that's hurt other human beings in this way? And they just say, here's what I did. Here's what drove me. Here's where I am now. And here's what I think of what I did. And we have those memoirs in our society of mob hitmen, right? Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Of mass murderers have written books talking about all their victims, of cannibals who've written about eating other people. Josh said there's no book. There's no book. And he said there's professional literature. He says, but you don't have access to that stuff. And I just thought, imagine how hard it is, how brave and difficult it is for a victim to try to share that information, But it turns out it's impossible for an offender, that it doesn't exist, that I don't think we can let it exist. I just wondered, like again, what is literature for if not to project your humanity, into the perspectives of others? And so I decided to give it a try. But I had narratively had a few things on my side. One, I think we immediately feel for characters who struggle. And here's a guy who has these impulses, and he's fighting a battle. And Josh told me this. He said, these people are fighting life and death battles all day, every day, and you don't know it. Those are characters we care about. The reason we don't know it is because they can never share their true selves with anyone. And I think we care greatly about characters who can't do that. And the third, he's in a trap. He's absolutely alone in a trap that could spring on him. And, when I, counsel writers who are saying, I'm not getting enough sympathy, for a character, I say, put them in a trap. Put them in a hopeless wall of impossibilities and see them grapple with it. So I think these things make you really care about this person. And then you start to wonder if he's going to succeed. He gives himself a horrible test. There's a couple girls who live in the apartment building next door who are neglected. And he decides to see if he's a good person or a bad person. And he believes that he's capable of goodness. And he decides to kind of help them and caretake them. And we know that if he messes up, it's irreversible, right? And it's so tense and dangerous. Yeah. Yeah. What did you think of reading that story?
It stayed with me for a long time.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I thought it was very interesting that he struggled so much with the question of whether he was good or bad, but I never had that question. I felt like he was a good person. And I also liked, there was some line about that when you've been hurt, it hurts every day the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really true of pain and trauma.
Yeah.
And it was just an incredible story.
Yeah. I teach a class at Stanford on trauma narratives and the particular forms and shapes they take. And so that's a topic that personally I care about a lot. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to add to that, today's LA Times has a story about the conviction of 3 people who murdered a woman and lured her into a sex chamber and tortured her and threw her in a ravine. So there's another end of, sort of the despicableness of life in another extreme version. I mean,
we can all agree to get rid of that human being, that the world's better off without him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Until maybe you meet him, talk to him, then it's not so easy.
So I was going to suggest that on your metaphor of 3 things. The third one is of yourself is perfecting yourself. If you think about all of the psychological, groupthink and all that of the 70s on, it's perfecting yourself or perfecting the you. And in North Korea, as you described it, it's perfecting the him.
That's right.
Totally.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was interesting. The other reaction I had was to the thumb of the audience. Is that perplexity, meaning intrigue, interest? Is that what develops in that? Kay Ryan was here last night.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
What do you mean the thumb of the audience?
The noise you.
Oh, the thrum.
Hear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is that close to perfect? I don't mean that negatively, because perplexity has intrigue, or gee, I never thought of that. I'm not. Is that what you're trying to get to an audience, to think about it in different ways?
Yeah, I think like a couple of the twin joys of being a human, like the really awesome things, are a surprise and inevitability. We want destiny to be at work in our lives, and that your life must go to this place that's right. But of course we want twists and turns and joy and to the unexpected. And in art, we can make them come together perfectly at the end. You do not know what's going to happen at the end of that poem. When you get there, you're like, oh, of course. It had to happen. I didn't see it coming, but I felt it was coming on some level because the artist has set these things up. Cade used language that evoked a certain thing. She'd put an image in there, a correlative with imagery that made some kind of metaphor, and this chimed with that metaphor of before. She twisted language that suggested a deviation from the norm she'd created, and we go, oh yeah. And you know, at the end of this story I wrote about Nirvana, I was like, I always write like I have no idea where it's going, and I kind of got toward the end. I was like, ooh, if I survived that sex scene, and there was only one. I made up the other two, but and I said to my wife, I was like, how the hell am I going to get out of this story? I don't know what's going to happen. And she read it. She's like, duh. You've got a wife who needs Kurt Cobain. You've got a guy who has a machine that brings people back to life. He has to bring Kurt Cobain back to life. And it was just so obvious that I'd set the whole story up there, but it was a surprise to me. I didn't see it, you know. So there are many things going on with that throne, and that's what I think is going on. Yes, sir.
Given your immense research and fabulous book on North Korea, have you given any thought to how the world would respond to a collapsed North Korea?
Yeah, that's the gigantic question, right? Well, there's all kinds of ways for things to collapse. Everybody in the world is trying to figure out what's going to happen with North Korea. It may slowly change and evolve. You know, it could open up in market ways. I think it's going to collapse. But the hallmark of the regime is durability. It's over 60 years now. You know, 3 generations, and it just keeps going. There's a few special factors that make the control so total. And there are, you know, thousands of people, and all they do every day is plan for scenarios. And when they know too much, well, Kim Jong-un kills them all and gets a whole new group of people close to him to plan for these scenarios. But, you know, that notion of the black swan, something that nobody sees coming, I think North Korea is really ripe for that. You know, in '92 they had a fairly significant nuclear accident that they never revealed that could have like unbalanced the whole society. A tsunami, like something they don't see coming. They didn't see the famine coming, and that, you know, almost ended them. They came very close. I mean, you can only lose so many millions of people from starvation before there's no one left to take orders. But here's the problem with North Korea, is that there is no political will on the planet Earth to change anything. So South Korea does not want North Korea to go away, no matter what President Park says. She has a commission for reunification, and they're drawing up all these scenarios, but they can barely handle, honestly, 1,000 defectors a month who make it to South Korea. When they make it, these are people who've come from a country that still does not have a stoplight to one of the most sophisticated cities on the planet. And we think we're real cool, but if you've been to Seoul, you know they're 5 years ahead of any other city in terms of technology and sophistication. And those people who make it from, you know, and I tackled this exact issue in the story, Fortune Smiles, when they make it to the South, it's very difficult for them. They have to go to a facility called Hanawon, which is like a university that helps them cope and teaches them like how to interact with people in the South, how to greet them, why you have to pay for your food, what an ATM is, why you have to pay for where you live, how your relationship with a boss might work. There are whole like organized crime units who do nothing but befriend and predate North Korean defectors because they get a check every month. It's really difficult for them. Imagine if not 1,000 people came, but 23 million of them came. You know, it's not like German reunification. These are people their whole lives, they've not been educated for the most part, they've been indoctrinated. And nothing they've been given helps them adjust to the Western world, as we would call it. It just helped them be obedient servants of the regime. So South Korea is not prepared, and they don't want anything to happen in the, you know, in the near future. China does not want North Korea to collapse. For one thing, you know, they love it that there's crazy North Korea there to take all the attention off their human rights issues. You know? It's really a good tool for them. But they know that if the peninsula collapses, and here's North Korea and here's South Korea, that the South is going to move up to their border. The unified Korea we have 30,000 troops there, and we park all of our nuclear submarines there. And so U.S. troops will be on the Chinese border. Imagine if there were Chinese troops in the Baja, in Tijuana, how we would feel about that. Imagine if the Chinese parked all their Trident submarines in the Baja, you know, in the Gulf. I mean, they can't have it in any way. They'll do anything to keep that from happening. And so, and you know, North Korea's made enemies of everyone else. Anyone who might help. Southeast Asia, Burma, Japan. So it's intractable, really, right now. So, sorry, that was a depressing tour. Yes, sir.
To go from the sublime to the ridiculous, can you say a few words about Dennis Rodman?
Yeah, I can. Dennis Rodman. Who's Dennis Rodman? Just can we define him?
Basketball player.
Former basketball player.
Who went there.
Right. We all thought he was dead until he turned up in Pyongyang. When your proof of life is that you appear in North Korea, you've fallen pretty far. I do have. It's probably our last question. I do have a Dennis Rodman anecdote. I won't give you the feces smearing one because that nobody would want to hear an ugly story like that. I'll tell you a different one though. I wrote an article for GQ about a man named Kenji Fujimoto. And Kenji Fujimoto was Kim Jong-il's personal chef. Fujimoto was Japanese, and he answered an ad, and he went to North Korea to train people how to make sushi because Kim Jong-il liked sushi. Kim Jong-il, he went of his own free will. Kim Jong-il liked his sushi so much, he said, "You're going to be my personal chef." That's that. Kenji Fujimoto then was never going to leave. He became a captive for the rest of his life until his daring escape. Kim Jong-il forced him to marry a pop singer, etc. And so, but Kenji Fujimoto rolled with KJI. There are 17 main palaces in North Korea. They call them guest houses there, as their euphemism. And Kenji Fujimoto spent all day with Kim Jong-il. And so he would cook for him all day. Then Kim Jong-il would have his party every night. And then afterwards, the two would go drinking. Because Fujimoto was a big drinker. He was also a victim of terrible abuses as a kid. So he just loved abusive guys who were drunks. And that was Fujimoto's life. That's how he was raised. So for almost 18 years, this guy hung out with Kim Jong-il. And when Kim Jong-il had two kids, Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-nam, there was Kim Jong-il, there were kids from other weddings, but his main two kids that he had as possible successors was little Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-nam. And so everyone says from the beginning Kim Jong-un had the eye of the tiger, that he was tough and fierce. And it was the older one that they were worried about. But they probably tried to kill Kim Jong-il 5 times. You know, we don't know for sure, but that's probably, you know, he was right to be paranoid constantly that his own people were trying to kill him. He became paranoid that people were going to kill his kids. And so one day he fired the nannies. When Kim Jong-un was 8, his brother was 11. One day Kim Jong-un fired the nannies, and weirdly the dude he trusted the most in the world was Kenji Fujimoto, for a couple reasons. One, Fujimoto never bothered to learn Korean, so he couldn't understand anything anyone said. And so when they would go naked into the sauna every night and kiss, an interpreter had to come with. And the interpreter knew if he shared any of this, he would get killed. So they had a weird relationship, and he also trusted Fujimoto not to poison him every single day of his life. So he would confide everything in Fujimoto when they drank, and Fujimoto didn't know anyone to tell any of these stories to. And so this was his sole confidant in life that he trusted all his personal vulnerabilities to. He was a great source for me in making my portrait of Kim Jong-il, and so that's why I wanted to write more about him in nonfiction. So anyway, here's the answer to that question. Here's the anecdote. When Kim Jong-un is 8, Kim Jong-il puts Fujimoto in charge of him every morning, full time. So For 4 hours every morning, the kids played with Fujimoto. They liked him. He was the goofy, funny Japanese guy. And he would make kites and do all this stuff, but he didn't have kids, Fujimoto, and he didn't really know too much about it. So he said to Kim Jong-il, oh, in Japan, kids have rollerblades. So, you know, Kim Jong-il got those over. He said, oh, kids in Japan have video games. So Kim Jong-il got a video games. Fujimoto said, oh, there are water parks, blue tubey water parks in Japan, and because he didn't know what to do with these kids. And so if you look at the satellite images, every guest house has these blue water parks behind them that were built especially just because Fujimoto said, hey, that's what kids like. And Kim Jong-il had no idea what kids like. He was raised by a murderous dictator named Kim Il-sung. Okay? He didn't know what kids' lives were like. So finally, Fujimoto says, hey, you know what kids do in Japan? They play basketball. And so they had a basketball court regulation made at every guest house. And the Koreans now love basketball, but at the time they didn't know really that much about basketball. And so what Fujimoto would do is he would try to teach the boys how to play basketball. But the problem was, what?
You didn't
know how to play
Yeah, they had never seen anyone play basketball. So Fujimoto wrote to his sister in Nagano and said, you need to send me tapes of people playing basketball. So this was before the famine, so she sent the Bulls' 1990 championship run all through the entire playoffs to their victory. And of course, it was Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, and Michael Jordan. Now, Kim Jong-il became fascinated with these games. Like, the whole world turned out for these, and the energy of them, and the athleticism of them. They were all unbelievably fascinated. So Kim Jong-un watched these tapes, and they loved Michael Jordan, and they loved Pippen, and Rodman was this crazy dude too. So, you know, anyway, I could go on and on about the stories, but what's true about Rodman is that Kim Jong-un and his father watched these videos together, and their only real connective time was videos every night. And so this was a special, meaningful time for him. He also regarded these people as the greatest humans he had access to in the entirety of the outside world. He also watched these stadiums nightly of Americans erupt at their every move. They idolized these Chicago Bulls players, and in their mind, these were the greatest people in the world. Now, we laugh at someone like Rodman going over there. They did make, they reached out to Pippen and Jordan, who of course wanted nothing to do with this, but Rodman was like, I'm game. And, you know, Kim Jong-un has still not been to another country. No world leader will come to greet him. The most important person in the world who's come to see him is Kim Jong-un, you know? And, I'm sorry, Dennis Rodman.
Dennis Rodman.
But I think that little boy is still there who had his hero, his ultimate lifelong hero, come around the world to see him. And from their perspective, I think it's a really serious deal. And it was a real honor. Until the feces smearing incident, which was bound to happen. But that's for another evening. Thank you for coming. I'd be honored to sign up.